All right, you guys. So welcome to today's lecture/workshop. My name is Neely, and I'm a functional nutritionist. I received my degree in biochemistry and nutritional sciences from the University of California, Davis, almost 13 years ago, maybe 14, I don't know. And so I've started my private practice since then, and I've been working with people and I've been helping them with three major issues. Normally people come to me with digestive issues, they come to me with anxiety and depression, and they come to me with hormonal imbalances. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the causes of anxiety and depression and how to naturally fix that condition. It's a really big subject. And I'm doing this because, again, right now is not, in my opinion, not yet a positive time. There's a lot of darkness in the world. And this is my one way that I could think of to bring some light for anyone who might be struggling. So this is a free class. Please make sure to pay it forward if you received any benefit from this. Even if you just smile at a stranger, that is sufficient cost. Okay, wonderful. So we're going to get started. I am going to share my screen with you, and we're going to start the presentation. Okay, just give me 1 second. I'm not the most tech-savvy person. Okay. Share screen. Yofi. And I'm recording, right? Yes, I think just in case somebody did this last time. Yes, I'm recording. Okay. Just one moment. Okay. Yofi. Okay. So just a reminder that today we're talking about treating anxiety and depression naturally. So first, we have to understand that there are many different reasons for anxiety and depression. Okay, so we're going to talk specifically about cases of anxiety and depression that have a biochemical basis. We're not talking about people who are going through a hard time and so therefore feel a little bit more anxious, although the advice that I'm going to give is going to be useful for that. What we're specifically talking about are the situations that people face that they have a predisposed, no, I'm not speaking properly. Let me say this more clearly. What we're going to be talking about, what we're going to be discussing are cases of anxiety and depression that have a more genetic basis, in the sense that people are just more likely to experience anxiety, and no matter what they go through in their life, even if everything's going great, they have a higher likelihood of experiencing anxiety and depression. Now, if at any point I say something that doesn't make clear because I cannot see you guys right now, please interrupt me, ask a question. I have no problem answering you, or I have no problem telling you that I'll answer you later, okay? Okay, so let's just go have an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about these few things. What are the physiological and biochemical causes of anxiety and depression? We're not talking about situational anxiety or situational depression. We're talking about when someone, again, has something physiological in them that gives them an increased risk and tendency to feel more anxious and to feel more depressed. We're going to talk about what a metabolic disorder is, and we're going to have an overview of all the chemical messengers at play, which we otherwise call neurotransmitters. And then the most important part of this talk is we're going to talk about what are the most important actionable steps that you could take now that you have all of this information. What can you do? What should you do if you're someone who has an increased likelihood for anxiety and depression? Now, everything that I'm going to tell you is going to be beneficial for short-term anxiety and depression, but is going to be a necessity for anyone who has, again, a predisposition to feel those feelings or to have a difficulty in their mental health. Any questions so far? Are we all cool? Okay. All right. So, I was talking to my husband about me giving over this class. And so he asked me, like, how are you going to be able to distinguish between anxiety and depression that comes from nurture versus anxiety and depression that comes from nature? And so I think that it's a really fair question. And I think something that we do not see in the literature quite yet is how much each one plays its role, like to what percentage. Like, let's say, for example, someone could have the most idyllic life and yet they still suffer from anxiety and depression. Some people could have a really, really hard and uncomfortable upbringing and be happy as can be. I'm thinking specifically about my uncle Shmulik, who is in his 90s and was a Holocaust survivor and has seen probably the most horrific side of mankind, and yet is the happiest person in the world, in my opinion. So I think that even though we see exceptions, that there are some people who are specifically unfazed by their nurture and are only governed by, let's say, the nature of their physiology. There are such cases, but I think that if we were to speak in layman's terms, it's really not clear how much, the way that you speak to yourself in your head, like your inner dialogue, affects your anxiety and depression. It's not clear how much your life circumstances affect your experience of anxiety and depression. And I think that it varies from person to person, regardless of, like, let's say, for example, there's some scientist who's going to be able to one day discover like how much this actually plays a role, like how much our nurture plays a role into our nature. It doesn't necessarily matter because, first off, our nature doesn't have to be triggered. And secondly, there's always going to be actionable steps that you could take to counteract your nature. So we should never, ever feel or be discouraged that our nature is somehow a death sentence or a prison sentence, because there's always some way out of the experience that we're in the midst of. Okay. So that being said, it's very, very interesting because in regards to the science of mental health, there's very little understanding of why people experience what they experience. And most of the medications that people take for anxiety or depression or even bipolar disorder have been discovered on accident. So most of the breakthroughs, most of the wonderful breakthroughs that we've seen in regards to mental health and the tools that we have been completely accidental. And the reason why that's really important to understand is because it's not like there's a great understanding of what's the cause of the problem. And now that we understand the cause, we're creating solutions that are based off of that cause. Up until recently, there's been very, very little understanding of what is the cause of anxiety and what is the cause of depression. And I use anxiety and depression very loosely because people experience their mental health differently. So please note that when I'm saying anxiety and when I'm saying depression, I'm really just using those loosely as to the things that we experience when we feel mentally unwell. Okay. So as I've said, up until recently, researchers and scientists and doctors have not been really clear as to what is the cause of anxiety and depression. For a very long time, people thought that anxiety and depression was caused by neurotransmitter imbalances. And while it is true that people who experience anxiety and depression have neurotransmitter imbalances, What we see now in the research to date is that is actually just a side effect of a much bigger cause. And so when we take something like, let's say, for example, an SSRI, which basically all that really does is make one specific neurotransmitter, serotonin, recycled more often. All that really does is just, again, make a neurotransmitter that's considered low more efficient. And what research now shows is taking medications like an SSRI does not treat anxiety and depression, in the sense that it doesn't eliminate the root cause. Because more often than not, when you were to take that medication away from that person, again, the source of their anxiety and depression are still there, unless it was situational. Okay, so if someone is having, let's say, a biochemical cause for their anxiety and depression, and SSRI is not treating the core problem. So then the question is, well, what is the core problem when it comes to anxiety and depression? And there's a lot of research, recent research, that suggests, not definitively, but very, very, very strongly, that anxiety and depression is caused by a metabolic disorder. Okay, so what is a metabolic disorder? So I'm going to read this out loud so that everyone understands. A metabolic disorder arises from abnormal chemical reactions that disrupts the body's metabolism, potentially impairing the breakdown of large molecules for energy, or hindering cellular energy production, or distributing energy regulation. This dysfunction is occurring on a cellular level. So when someone has a metabolic disorder, what it essentially means is that the cell's ability to acquire energy is harmed. And so if energy is like the money or the currency of the body, and if the cell is not able to have sufficient currency to pay for things to happen, then it's almost like as if the entire optimal nature of the cell is now hindered. The cell is now not functioning in the way that it's supposed to. And then that's actually can lead to like a whole new discussion about like how we perceive disease now is more on a cellular level, but I digress. Okay, so basically this is really, really fascinating. And the reason why this is so fascinating is because if we understand that anxiety and depression is happening on a cellular level and it's really just a metabolic problem, this is so fixable. But you can't really fix something unless you know what the cause is. But if we understand now that most situations of anxiety and depression are because of a metabolic issue in the cell, this is like music to our ears, because it's something that we have great power in changing. Before we move on to how we change metabolic disorders, I want to distinguish between two different kinds of metabolic disorders, okay? Cellular issues. We can have metabolic disorders that are either inherited or acquired. Regardless of whether they're inherited or acquired, it really just means, again, that there's some issue going on in the cell. We don't know how to utilize the energy properly. We don't know how to build the energy. And we have most likely a problem in how the enzymes in our body are being utilized. Either we have too much of an enzyme, we're not producing enough of an enzyme. And so again, the whole nature of the cell is disrupted. So very interestingly, inherited metabolic disorders comes from obviously a genetic defect, meaning you have either some type of SNP, which means like a single nucleotide polymorphism, which affects your enzyme production. Or again, you have some type of genetic defects, which again affects how the cell is working. Some inherited metabolic disorders, an example of that could be like schizophrenia. So schizophrenia is an interesting form of an inherited metabolic disorder because it's something that is only triggered later on in life. The fact that it's triggered later on in life actually means that there's a lot that a person could do in their lifestyle to affect the onset of this disorder. Okay. Another really, really fascinating example of an inherited metabolic disorder is autism. Not all cases of autism are inherited cases, but many cases are. There's a lot of research that shows that it's, again, a genetic disorder in one of the enzymes, which again affects you on a metabolic cellular level. And what research shows that if you give infants specific types of amino acids, like branched chain amino acids, as they're growing and developing, meaning any time between the ages of 0 till 2, they have no symptoms of their autism. So the reason why I'm sharing this with such enthusiasm and vigor is because we have to understand, even if we have an inherited metabolic disorder, there are so many actionable steps that you could take in order to decrease the symptoms of that disorder or how it even presents itself. Now, besides inherited metabolic disorders, we have acquired metabolic disorders. And these are ones that we are kind of already familiar with. Like, for example, diabetes the type 2 diabetes, is a very clear example of acquired metabolic disorder. This is based off of lifestyle, perhaps lack of physical activity, perhaps overeating, perhaps not knowing what's the best food for your body, etc. But this is something that we have no genetic basis for. It's just purely just how we've been behaving in life, purely nurture. Okay. Before I move on, do we have any questions? And remember, I can't see your faces, so if you're nodding or if you're raising your hands, I have absolutely no idea. Just unmute yourself and ask away. Silence? Okay. So no questions. So basically, what we've understood so far is that the root cause of anxiety and depression, right, that's not situational, there's a problem that's happening in the metabolism of a cell. Now, that's fantastic. We're going to, at the end of the lecture, talk about how one is supposed to treat this. But I want to talk about some of the players that are affected by this metabolic disorder, because you'll understand the different ways that a person is then therefore supposed to treat themselves. Okay, so now we move on. I want to talk about what a neurotransmitter is. Okay, so one of the most common consequences of a metabolic disorder is the disruption of the neurotransmitters in your body. A neurotransmitter is simply a chemical messenger responsible for transmitting signals within the nervous system. So like, let's say, for example, okay, so Gila, so she's in this class right now, and let's say I can't speak, and I want to send Gila a message. So I'm going to write a message for her, and I'm going to transmit this message. I'm going to send her the message, and then she's going to be able to read it and then do whatever it says on the message. So that's an example of a neurotransmitter. A neurotransmitter is just a message that one cell sends to the other. Now, why do we call it neurotransmitters? Is because they affect the nervous system, okay? But it doesn't necessarily need to be produced in the nervous system, meaning like the brain or the spinal cord. It could be produced in any part of the body, but it's something that specifically affects the nervous system. And it has a wide, we use them for many, many different physiological reasons, okay? So what I wanted to do was go over the different neurotransmitters. One, it's just very, very insightful, but it also allows for us to be able to determine what is the problem, what is the cause in our anxiety and our depression. Okay. So we're going to overview different neurotransmitters. Now, remember how I used this example of I'm speaking to Gila, right? And the neurotransmitter that I use is how I communicate to her. So what that means is each neurotransmitter is a separate message. It says something different to the body. So when I sit down with a client, let's say, I'm going to ask them all sorts of questions about, how they perceive the world, how they feel, etc. And based off of that very nuanced information, I'm going to be able to tell which neurotransmitters are off balance. Because again, each neurotransmitter has a different message. Okay. So before I go into these different neurotransmitters, I'm going to ask you a question that I typically ask my clients, and I want you to think about it. Don't answer me out loud, but think about it in your head, okay? So let's say there are 3 different emotional scenarios, and I want you to think about if any of them feel relevant to you, okay? Now, either one could feel relevant, a few of them could feel relevant, or none of them could feel relevant. Okay, so the first situation is like this. In your life, you sometimes feel like you're just not going to come out on top. You feel largely insecure. You feel like things are just not going to work out in your favor. Maybe you sometimes even feel threatened by the situations around you. And you just, the theme is that you just feel largely insecure. So this is scenario number 1. You could resonate with it, don't have to. Okay, scenario number 2 is you technically understand that everything around you is fine, but you don't really connect to anything that's going on around you. It almost feels like life is gray or on mute, meaning you see what's going on, but you're very much disconnected to what's going on. Okay, that's scenario number 2. And scenario number 3 is you feel like everything is so out of your control. And because everything is so out of your control, it's really, really hard for you to relax. There are just so many things that you don't get to have say, you feel frustrated with, you wish it was your way. And because it's not that, it's just really hard for you to achieve a sense of calm. It would be curious to hear from any of you if you guys resonated with any of those situations, if anyone felt one of them or multiple. Would anyone like to voice if they connected to any of them?
I'm a 3 for sure.
3 for sure. Okay, so we're definitely going to talk about it. But what's really fascinating is that these 3 different situations is representative of a different neurotransmitter imbalance. Now, remember, we're not saying that the neurotransmitter balance is the cause of the anxiety and depression. We're saying that's one of the ways that we could tell how we're supposed to treat this anxiety and depression. Okay, the neurotransmitter imbalance, again, is a cause of most likely something that's going on metabolically. But if we don't pinpoint which neurotransmitters are off simultaneously, it makes it much harder to have a very specific type of treatment. So I'm really happy whoever shared that it's number 3. It means that you were listening and you're going to get really useful information from this. Okay, so let's go over the scenarios. The first scenario that we talked about has to do with an imbalance. Yeah? Did someone want to say something?
Yeah, it's Gila. I just wanted to note that the first scenario used to characterize me, maybe at the time, early, like in a particular type of period in my life. And now, because
Uh-huh.
of our work together and maybe changes that I've made, I feel like it's less potent. And maybe number 3 is more like is more relevant, I'd say. So I could see, I'm curious, just because I've had my issues, like if we fix something on a food level, it affects the way we see ourselves vis-a-vis the world.
I think you're 100% correct. I think that it's very interesting because, again, this goes back to this question of like, what is it, nature versus nurture? So like in regards to nurture, one part of nurture is we could develop a narrative for ourselves, and we could be taught that certain situations are threatening. And so it's really like in work with like a therapist or with some type of helper that we could unlearn or uncondition ourselves and not view certain things as threatening. And so therefore that really relieves our nervous system. And so therefore then we could experience changes in our levels of anxiety and depression. But then there's also, again, this other component, which is on a cellular level, when we make changes to our body via food, because that has a huge impact on the metabolic state of our cells, then that also causes us to perceive the world differently. If our neurotransmitters are now more balanced and we're more relaxed based off of just how we changed our lifestyle and how we ate, our view of the world is going to be different, 100%. So again, it's like really hard to know what percentage every person is experiencing independently. But what's wonderful about it is it doesn't necessarily matter, because you could have a lot of tools at your disposal. And as long as you're implementing those tools, you're going to receive benefit. So I think that is a very insightful comment. Okay, so going back to serotonin. So the first situation that we expressed was actually an imbalance in serotonin. Serotonin is best described as your survivalship neurotransmitter. It's the neurotransmitter that if you have enough of, you feel largely secure, you feel optimistic, you feel almost like at ease with what the circumstances are. I mean, obviously, sometimes they're very difficult circumstances, but there are some people who could have, like everything going well for themselves, and yet they still feel very largely insecure, feel very threatened by their peers, etc. So anytime someone feels largely threatened, insecure, and really nervous about their circumstances, this is very largely a problem in serotonin. What's interesting is, and this is an example of how not everything is produced in the brain, 90% of your serotonin is produced in your digestional tract. So people who have digestional disorders like Crohn's disease, colitis, just like undiagnosed celiac, for example, people who eat a lot of processed food that then really disrupts their digestive tract have a higher likelihood of having depleted serotonin levels. And this is very fascinating because all a person really has to do in that circumstance is heal their digestive tract, and then a lot of their anxiety and depression will go away. That's an example of how it's not a metabolic disorder. It's simply a dysfunction in the digestive tract, but it's creating such a depleted environment of serotonin that they lack that feeling of calm and security. Now, serotonin has a lot of different functions. It's really necessary for the production of melatonin, which is what allows for us to sleep. It influences our appetite. So people with suppressed serotonin have larger appetites. It's harder for them to feel satiated. People with chronic constipation could have depleted serotonin because it's actually the serotonin that helps us with our motility. If someone has a spastic colon, they're potentially putting themselves at risk for having a serotonin dump, which then means later on they might have a depressive episode. And anyone who takes antibiotics for the digestive tract sometimes can also have a dump in serotonin because they're now, their whole gut environment is altered and they're not producing enough serotonin to then send back to their central nervous system. And one more thing, it's very curious that when we have deficiency in serotonin, we also have issues with our memory. So if anyone is sitting here and being like, wow, that really speaks to me, that's something that happens to me a lot, then part of your treatment plan is going to be doing the things that are specifically known to increase serotonin production, while at the same time curing any type of metabolic disorder. Is that clear? Do we understand that relationship with serotonin and how we feel secure? Is that clear? And it's not clear for anyone. Please speak now or forever hold your peace.
What did you say, Theora? I'm sorry, I'm in bed. But you said part of the treatment, your last sentence, you said when we have a deficiency, we have issues with our memory, which of course I have.
Great.
Can't remember the last sentence.
So part of your treatment plan is, let's say, for example, everything that I've said speaks to you, then part of your treatment plan is rectifying not only the serotonin balance, meaning taking things that specifically increase serotonin, while at the same time fixing the metabolic disorder. But like I just specified, it's not always a metabolic disorder. Most of the time it is. But for example, a serotonin deficiency can be caused by any type of digestive disorder as well. So if someone has a digestive disorder and also has a serotonin deficiency, they don't need to work on their metabolic disorder. They need to work on their digestive disorder, and then also take things that will help nourish their serotonin levels. That's why I'm being very specific in how I'm going about this. So if we could just understand my reasoning.
Okay.
My reasoning was to first go over metabolic disorders because that seems to be the major reason why people have anxiety and depression. Okay. And then their anxiety and depression, their metabolic disorder can be also characterized as a specific type of neurotransmitter imbalance, like a serotonin imbalance. But we also have to be rational about it and say, there's no such thing as always or never. There are situations. Sometimes people don't have a metabolic disorder. Sometimes people have a digestive disorder. And at the same time, they could have a serotonin imbalance. So what a person needs to do is treat their serotonin imbalance, treat their digestive disorder. Does that make sense? Yeah, Leora? Does that make sense?
Is that because serotonin is produced in the digestive system? Is that the reason there's this correlation? Yeah.
100%. 90% of the serotonin that you produce is in your digestive tract. So if your digestive system is compromised, your serotonin concentration, that level that you create, how effective it is, how it transmits, is going to be compromised. Cool? Okay. So now the next neurotransmitter is dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of motivation. And that applied to the second issue that we were talking about, the second scenario, where I said, for example, you feel like, everything around you is technically fine, but it's on you, or it feels gray, or you feel disconnected to your surroundings. People who really resonate with that scenario typically have some type of dopamine imbalance. Okay, now, dopamine is largely produced by your behaviors and could also be affected, like we said before, by not an acquired, an inherited metabolic disorder. So, for example, Parkinson's disease is an example of a metabolic disorder that's inherited and affects and is caused by poor dopamine production in specific parts of the brain, specifically the cerebellum, which is the part on the base of your head. So that's very interesting, but just because something's inherited doesn't mean that there are not actionable steps that you could take that will significantly change how that inherited disorder is expressed. Okay, so the first thing that we have to understand about dopamine is that it is really, really affected by your behavior. So for example, if you scroll on your phone, really what you're trying to do is create dopamine hits. Certain addictive behaviors are like the body trying to search for dopamine hits. It's almost like a pleasure-seeking response that we get from outputs of dopamine. But there are a lot of different behaviors that we're going to talk about that can allow for you to get a dopamine response that's healthy and that doesn't later on cause an emotional drain. Okay, but we should understand, just like how with serotonin, that was your survivalship neurotransmitter, dopamine is your connection neurotransmitter, your motivation neurotransmitter. Most of the time when people feel unmotivated, they feel like they're not connected to their community, they're not connected to their family, they just don't want to be a part of anything. Most of the time, that comes from a dopamine depression. Okay, sounds like a lot of young people today. Okay. Wait, sorry, any questions about dopamine? No? Okay. The next two
Neely?
explains the. Oh, yes,
I'm
please.
sorry, do you remember me? I'm Rachel's cousin, Erin.
I just don't see your face because
Oh, sorry.
all I see is my presentation. So
okay.
please remind me who you are since I can't see your face.
Rachel Bihar's cousin.
Hey, how are you?
How are you?
I'm good, well. So wait, I didn't hear your first name. So which cousin?
My name is Erin. Her name is Rachel.
Yeah, Erin in Minnesota.
Yes, I used to live there.
Yes.
Yeah, now I'm in Austin. I'm in Austin, Texas.
Oh,
yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, I've been
So
there
how can I answer your question, Erin?
Yeah,
so good to talk to you.
I actually wanted to go back to your first segment when you were talking about
please.
SSRIs, and I'm interested. I'm not on SSRI, but I am on Wellbutrin, and that works a little differently, where it blocks. Or I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I was just curious about if you think that has just negative effects on the brain, because sometimes it can be considered counterproductive on anxiety.
Right. I think that you're asking a really legitimate question. And I'm going to say the question out loud before I answer it, because I feel like when we go through more of the presentation, we'll have more shared information that I could then give you a more thorough answer. But I think that it's a really important question to answer. So I'm going to break apart the question into little mini questions so that I answer it effectively. So the first question that I would want to answer and will answer is, what is my opinion on prescription medications when it comes to anxiety and depression? That's number one. And then the second question that I think is really relevant to what you asked is, how do you know which medication is going to be the most effective for you? Is that a really relevant question based off of yours?
Yeah, absolutely. And just in general, if, there's risk to it long term, and, like you were saying before, it's like can be used for something more situational, but people that are using it like long term may not have the same benefit, or it may have some long term effects. And,
Right. I think these are really important questions to be asked. I'm writing them down to make sure that I answer them. But I just want to go through more of the presentation so that we have some more shared information. Do you have any other questions before I move on?
No.
Okay, cool. I really appreciate your question. Okay, so the next situation number 3, is glutamate and GABA. So glutamate is this excitatory neurotransmitter. It excites your nervous system. It is really, really valuable for our ability to focus, for synaptic plasticity, for learning, for memory, for changing how the brain functions in different situations. It's a really fantastic neurotransmitter, just like every neurotransmitter is, because it has a specific function in mind. The problem with glutamate typically comes when we have too much of it. And when we have too much of it, focus becomes control, right? Have you ever noticed that, like, when you really focus on something, but then like it's just your focus becomes too deep, that's almost like you're almost like in need of control? Does that resonate with anyone? It totally resonates with me in previous parts of my life. I feel like this is more my issue. So the question is, why would glutamate be in excess? And the typical reason why glutamate becomes in excess is because it's actually supposed to convert to this neurotransmitter called GABA. GABA is a neurotransmitter that makes you feel very calm and relaxed, and then it stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your peace response. Just makes you really, really at ease. So the neurotransmitter that is largely used for focus, it eventually is supposed to convert to this neurotransmitter that makes you feel calm. If there's a problem in this conversion, glutamate goes up and GABA goes down. Your need to control goes up. Your ability to relax goes down. And that's a very common chemical makeup of someone with like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, where again, they're hyper focused on something, which comes from the excessive amount of glutamate, and then their ability to relax like isn't really quenched by their focus or their need to control. So really, most of the time, what that comes from is from improper conversion. And I'm going to present solutions for that as well. So again, most of the time, all of these issues come from metabolic disorders, but this is how these metabolic disorders are expressed. They're expressed in imbalances in these specific chemical messengers. And because these messengers are imbalanced, our perception of reality is skewed. I personally find this interesting. I find this so interesting. I think the reason why I find this interesting is because when I first started working with people, when I was interning, like my stage in my first year out of college, I used to work in this clinic. And they used to do neurotransmitter tests. So neurotransmitter tests are saliva tests that then measure the different concentrations of your neurotransmitters, your excitatory hormones, etc. So it'd be very interesting for me because one of my roles was to explain to the client how to do the test. And then I would go over the results with them afterwards. And I did this for a full year, and I felt like I almost became like this AI computer, because I would assess what their behavior was like during my time with them when I would explain their tests. I also had a little bit more history with them before because I was working in this clinic. And then I would compare their behavior to the results of their tests. And I saw very, very clear indications of like, oh, this is how you behave when your glutamate is depressed, or this is how you behave when your glutamate is in excess. It's very, very, very fascinating. And then when we would change how they ate and we would change their lifestyle, you would see how they would emotionally even out and how their behavior would change. And what I think is so wonderful is that there's so much that a person could do to change their experience of their own life, both in how they perceive others and both in how they perceive themselves. I think it's really, really fascinating. Anyways, so there's another one that I want to talk about, which is called norepinephrine, which is like a pseudo hormone slash pseudo neurotransmitter. This is something that's specifically produced in the adrenal glands. It's part of our fight or flight. So, like, again, serotonin was produced in the digestive system. Norepinephrine is produced in the adrenal glands. This affects our ability to be on the ready when we feel stressed. It allows for us to feel alert and focused and have like quick energy. This is really great. Let's say, for example, if you're in a debate, if you are at times where it's a high stress situation, but you actually need to be functional. So that is what norepinephrine is really great for. It's not great when everything is fine, you're in a calm environment, and you feel like you're in fight or flight. You feel wired, you feel on edge when there's nothing around you to edge you out. And that's like a result of a norepinephrine imbalance when your adrenal glands are producing norepinephrine when they shouldn't be. And that causes a lot of anxiety and tension in people. What did you say?
How do you spell the word that you said now?
Norepinephrine?
Yes.
It's right here. It's NOREPINEPHRINE.
Wow. Thank you.
Of course. So this can
Neely,
sometimes
I don't think
happen.
you're sharing a presentation. I don't see a presentation.
What? You guys
So
don't see my presentation?
We've seen your face the entire time.
I
Yeah,
didn't
no,
realize you
not
were
at all.
sharing a presentation until you just said it's on there. Otherwise, I would have said something earlier.
I feel so embarrassed.
What
I
did you
cannot
do?
believe it. I thought I was sharing my screen this whole time and I couldn't see you guys, and I didn't understand why I didn't see you guys. You guys, this has been really silly. Do you see my screen now?
No.
Oh, you
It says
don't?
it's loading. Oh, yeah, now we do. Yeah.
I've enjoyed
Wow.
looking at your face, Neely. Don't worry.
You've
Okay.
enjoyed looking at my face, but I've spent so
Always.
much time on presentation.
Always.
You're so cute, Rachel. Thank you. Okay, let me just show you my presentation so that I feel satisfied. Can you see the work that I put into this, please? Okay, treating anxiety and
gorgeous.
depression naturally. This is really funny. Isn't it
We
so
love
pretty?
you,
This is what
Neely.
I've been using as my slides. You guys will get this after we speak. This is really funny.
Taking
Look, I even
crazy
put
notes,
pictures to
trying to
entertain
remember
you
it all, and
guys.
it's all right here.
So sorry. Okay,
All
so
good, Neely.
okay, so basically, serotonin, dopamine, glutamate, GABA, that's what we've been talking about. It's actually really good that someone said something. Who said it? I really appreciate it. Thank you. And then norepinephrine. You see, Noah, if you were going to ask, how do you spell norepinephrine? Where would we be right now? Okay. Okay, so that's an overview. Okay. Now what I want to do is go through the actionable steps. Now that we kind of have a basic understanding of, okay, we understand that anxiety and depression actually most often than not happens on a cellular level. There's something going on in our cells. We're not allocating our energy properly. We're not utilizing our energy properly. And so therefore, as a result, our cells are not functioning properly. And then that collectively has an effect on our entire nervous system and therefore our mindset and how we perceive life. So there's that. That's number one. Number two is then, as a response to that, we have all these different neurotransmitters that as a response to having metabolic disorder, not dysfunction, disorder. We'll talk about metabolic dysfunction in a second, but a metabolic disorder, as a result of that, now all of these neurotransmitters that are these chemical messengers are going to be askew. They're not going to be balanced. There are going to be certain that are higher, certain ones that are lower, etc. And understanding that, even though it's a secondary issue most of the time, understanding which neurotransmitters are at play here is really valuable. Now, one way that you could understand if they're at play or not is by the behavior, like the 3 different situations that I explained to you. Or you could do a really fancy schmancy saliva test and actually test that. And going back to Erin's question, I think that that's actually one of the best things to do before taking medications. I know that it comes at a great cost because these tests are not cheap. But in my opinion, most people who take medication aren't in pain. It might be mental pain, but it's still pain. And sometimes you could avoid a lot of trial and error, which then just extends the pain that we feel. So if we could avoid that if we do these saliva tests that can then show us what's actually imbalanced and then take the appropriate medication, because we know that the medication is going to help with that imbalance, right? We understand that the medication is not going to resolve the metabolic disorder that's the cause, but it's going to help us with the symptoms. And most of the research, most of the literature to date about medications say as such. Medications do not treat the cause, they treat the symptoms. They're there as like a crutch. Sometimes that crutch is long-term, sometimes that crutch is short-term. But again, it's important to understand which neurotransmitters are at play. And a really easy way to do that is by doing saliva testing, which will show you your serotonin, your dopamine, your norepinephrine, your epinephrine, and different amino acids that also play into this whole equation. But let's talk about actionable steps. Okay. Wow, I'm so happy that you guys can see this now. Please.
Can I ask okay. Hi, it's Rihanna, by the way. I guess I'm wondering, like, okay, now you're gonna get into actionable steps, but the question is, like, do we know which one we're lacking based on having the like the fact that we have?
You are asking such a fantastic question. I really appreciate your question because it's something that I should have started with before, which is who are these actionable steps for? Okay. So the answer for that is these actionable steps are for any person who feels challenged by their anxiety or depression, which means that their anxiety or depression is not situational. Their anxiety and depression is something that they experience perhaps differently at different times in their life, but it seems like it just never goes away. Okay. Every single actionable step that I'm going to suggest is for that person. Now, what we see in the literature, what we see in research today is one actionable step is not enough. When we want to create like a biochemical change, we're changing the environment and the chemistry of the cell. It typically requires 4 to 5 changes, external changes, before you see an internal change. So let's say, for example, this first thing that we haven't even explained yet, but like a methylated B complex. Just doing that alone is not an actionable step. No, the actionable steps, plural. It's going to require for you to do more than just one thing. Pick 4 or 5 of the things that I'm going to talk about, but it also depends on the severity of what you're experiencing. The more severe, the more actionable steps you need to take. And I'm going to go through each actionable step and explain one by one what each one is for.
I guess my question is more like, how do you know which neurotransmitter messenger, like you're calling them, which one you're locking? Like based on the fact of what your symptoms are, is what you can say, okay, this is the one that I'm locking, or is it like there's a specific cause of like, can I tell by my behaviors that like if what
So
I'm doing,
the
I'm
way that
locking serotonin?
Right. So you can tell by your behavior. Sometimes um sometimes it's hard, like I don't know, how do I answer this effectively? I wouldn't say this for you because I know you, but sometimes people lack the ability to introspect and evaluate their behavior and say, I really am having a hard time with my need to control, and so therefore can't relax. But that could be something that a person could honestly have a hard time introspecting. I know that that is definitely a weakness that I have. I could say that honestly. So if you're that type of person that really feels like they can't see themselves clearly, going to someone for an evaluation, whether it's someone like myself or a psychiatrist, could be very useful. Specifically, if they have a deep understanding of the different ways that neurotransmitters play out in people. Otherwise, a really great way, again, is like this saliva test. That's the way to know exactly what it is. And again, if you're going to be taking medications, and specifically if you feel like the medications that you're taking aren't 100% helpful, then that is a really great test to do. And I'll try to find details of where you could get this test. In America, this is a really easy test to find. In Israel, it's a little bit more challenging. But in the Facebook group, in the Nourish Daily Facebook group, I'll put in different links of where you can go and find these tests.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so let's talk about actionable steps.
I have a question.
So yes, please.
Sorry, these actionable steps, these are just for the serotonin one, or these apply to all four?
No. So in actionable steps, we are not, I think each one does something different. So I'll explain what each one is doing. This is only one page of actionable steps. There are more pages of actionable steps. So we're not being, I think what's easier is let me go through them one at a time, and then we'll understand what each one is for. Okay? Okay. So let's go through the first one. The first actionable step is taking a methylated B complex. This is really important because some people have a genetic mutation. This goes again in regards to this metabolic disorder. Some people have a gene mutation called the MTHFR gene mutation. I'm going to say that again. M like Mary, THFR gene mutation. It is very, very popular in the Jewish community. But in general, 20% of the population has some type of a form of this mutation, and then 50% of the population has another form of this mutation. And essentially, it's what it is. It's a methylation issue. It's a chemical reaction that doesn't take place, and so because it doesn't take place, it's really hard for people who are affected by this to build their neurotransmitters up properly. Okay. The wonderful thing about this problem, though, is that it's very, very treatable. All you have to do is take a methylated B complex. It can affect you in very, very deep, uncomfortable ways. But again, an actionable step for it is taking a methylated B complex, and then this genetic mutation is not a problem anymore. So different examples of methylated B complexes. Here in Israel, my favorite is a company called EcoSupp, ECOSUPP, EcoSupp. And so It's a B vitamin, which means that it's water soluble. Taking it once a day is going to have very little impact, but microdosing it throughout the day is going to have a wonderful impact. So taking it 2 times a day, 3 times a day, even 4 times a day in small doses can be really, really helpful. You should know that it's going to make your urine bright yellow. If you're in America and this methylated B complex is the Echo Sub is not available there, then a really good company is Thorne, THORNE. This is something that I would recommend for any person with any form of anxiety and depression. B vitamins are just necessary for the metabolism of the body. It helps with metabolic disorders, but it also specifically helps with this specific and very popular genetic mutation. Coolio? Okay. The next suggestion that I have for you guys is something called either, these are 2 separate things, phosphatidylserine or phosphatidylcholine. If someone is experiencing anxiety or depression, highly recommend this. This is something that's naturally occurring in lecithins, like for example, sunflower seed lecithin is an example of that. When I was breastfeeding my daughter, it's something that I took as a supplement because it's really good for your breast milk, and it's also really good for the baby because it gives it naturally occurring choline. What these do is, first off, it decreases inflammation in the brain. When you decrease inflammation in the environment, the cells obviously work better. But it's also really important for creating different chemicals that decrease the stress response in the body and in the brain, like acetylcholine, for example, which is also really important for concentration and focus. Okay. Now, the next suggestion that I have for you is magnesium L-threonate. Okay. This is really good for anyone who experiences chronic headaches because magnesium will help with the headaches. But the reason why I'm suggesting this magnesium is because it goes back to this slide, which you guys did not see, but it goes back to the glutamate and the GABA and how your glutamate is supposed to turn into GABA. And if it doesn't properly convert, that causes that really intense need to control and that inability to relax. So magnesium is necessary for that conversion. Most people have a magnesium deficiency. If someone is experiencing a magnesium deficiency, they are not going to have this conversion. And that's why magnesium is such an essential part of any person's mental health journey. Okay. It also causes a total body relaxation, helps calm the nervous system in general. Okay. Because obviously GABA, having enough GABA, that's something that stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your peace response. Okay. What I didn't mention before, because now we could talk about it, is that B vitamins, yes. Did someone ask a question? Or was this a blip? So what I was saying before, so now that we know this, what should also be mentioned is that B vitamins are also necessary for this conversion from glutamate to GABA. If you have a B vitamin deficiency, you're not going to have this conversion. So how does one know if someone has a B vitamin deficiency? Well, first off, there are multiple B vitamins. The very common question I ask people is, do you remember your dreams at night? If you remember your dreams, it means that you have sufficient vitamin B6. If you don't remember between 1 to 5 dreams a night, it means that you have insufficient amounts of B6. If you are deficient in B6, you're most likely deficient in other B vitamins. Now, most B vitamins you cannot test for in the blood. The only ones that you could really test for are folate, which is a B vitamin, or B12. B12 is not necessarily a representation of the other B vitamins because sometimes it's digestion related. But that's a really great way of assessing, like, do I have enough B vitamins? Am I remembering between 1 to 5 dreams a night? The more dreams you remember, the better, even though sometimes it's really annoying.
Neely?
Okay.
Neely?
Yes, please.
When you were talking about microdosing the
Mhm.
eco stuff, so if you were,
Yes.
is that 5 ml a couple times a day? Is that less than 5 ml? What is that? How would you microdose?
5 ml is a lot. I wouldn't take 5 ml at one time. I would take it's like a half a teaspoon is what I would normally take at a time. It's a lot less than 5 ml. I wouldn't take more than a half a teaspoon, and I would take that at least 3 times a day if it's something that you're really trying to work on. And there's really no danger of taking too much of it because it's water soluble. So and that's why we take it so frequently, is whatever is not necessary at that one moment, you urinate out, and that's why it makes your urine bright yellow.
Okay, so the lowest line might not be ml. The lowest line on the cap is a 5. I don't know what that is.
I would normally just take a half a teaspoon.
Great, thanks.
Neely, I actually, thanks to your previous session on emotional eating, I bought the Echo supplement. So they recommend the 5 ml once a day. So you're saying to split that in 2?
Yeah. I don't think it's good to take you can't benefit from taking a B vitamin once a day because it's a water soluble supplement. It's a water soluble vitamin. So again, whatever you don't need at that one time, you're going to urinate out. It's kind of like someone pouring money into your hand. You need the money, but you also need time to take the money in your hand and put it in your pocket before you could then acquire more. So I'm all for taking smaller doses more frequently. And the same goes, let's say, for example, something that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, which is vitamin C. Vitamin C is another example of a water soluble vitamin. So a lot of people take a huge doses of it, but that just causes it's not necessary because it just causes this inconvenience to the body. It's getting too much that it needs. It's better to take smaller amounts throughout the body than one large dose.
Okay, that's helpful. And with the magnesium, can you recommend a type in Israel?
So it's a really good question. Specifically in Israel, it's really hard to find the specific type of magnesium L-threonate. The L-threonate is a substrate that basically allows for this magnesium to pass through the blood-brain barrier. Not every form of magnesium is going to do that. Like, for example, magnesium citrate is not going to pass through the blood-brain barrier. Magnesium oxide, although it's great for blood pressure, is not going to pass through the blood-brain barrier. But we want to affect the nervous system. We want to affect the brain. We want it to affect the brain cells. And so therefore, excuse me, I don't know where I just went. So therefore, we want that specific kind. Don't get any other kind of magnesium in regards to this goal. You could easily find it on iHerb if you're in Israel, and then they'll deliver it to you. If you're in America, you could find it anywhere. You could find it on Amazon, find it on iHerb, find it in some stores, etc. But I haven't seen it in an actual health food store yet. But I also don't have a life and never get out, so it could be out there, and I just am not aware of it. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay.
Hi, Neely.
Okay.
Hi.
Yeah.
Can I ask, what do you think about nutritional yeast for B vitamins?
So it's a really great question. I'm not a fan of using nutritional yeast as a source of B vitamins because yeasts are not something that you're supposed to be having on a daily basis. Every once in a while, great, fantastic, go for it. It's really yummy. I understand that it adds like a cheesy flavor to things. And it's not that it's necessarily a bad food. It's just having excess yeast can really change the environment in the digestive system. And if you have it regularly, then again, it really changes the environment in the digestive system so much so that it could cause health issues. So having it every once in a while, I don't think is a bad thing, but it's not something that I recommend on a daily basis. And so therefore it can't be something that you would rely on as your source of B vitamins.
Okay. And what about like bananas for magnesium or nuts?
It's a really great question. So something that I said earlier on is there's this term called a SNP, or a single nucleotide polymorphism. And this basically, how we see this come out in a lot of people is that people will have this SNP that basically changes how well they absorb something. So some SNPs will make people absorb way more iron than others. And so they actually can get into this really bad state of an iron toxicity, even though they're eating like a really normal diet. So such people cannot have any red meat because they would overload the system with iron from it. Okay, so there's a question whether people who have, predisposition for anxiety and depression, if they most likely have a SNP that makes it harder for them to absorb magnesium. And so what I would say is that it would be very beneficial for anyone who's suffering from anxiety and depression to take it in a supplement form. I'm not saying that any person who has situational anxiety should take it, even though it might be helpful in the situation. And I'm not saying that every just regular Joe Schmo should be taking magnesium. But if we're saying there's this person and they're experiencing anxiety and depression, and they really are trying to find ways to manage it, I would say that magnesium L-threonate is a very safe way to manage it and decrease your experience of anxiety and depression. So yeah, you could get it from food. It's more just like there's this question mark whether the person experiencing anxiety and depression is really absorbing enough of the magnesium that they're getting from food. And that's why it's suggested to take it in supplement form as well as a healthy diet.
Okay, and so all the supplements you're recommending are like the best absorbed in the body, and they're not your standard ones that you're just getting like a multivitamin thing. All these ones are like much better for being absorbed.
Right. I'm not suggesting taking a multivitamin. I'm suggesting very specific things. And I don't benefit from making the suggestions. I don't have affiliate with anyone. I'd be happy to post links in the Nourish Daily group of like just what I would be taking if I was in the situation, what I recommend to my clients. So far, the companies that I've suggested are just because they're the best of the best, not like your regular disgusting toxic supplements that people are not regulating. Let's put it that way.
Can you please share your recommendations, like in an email or something, of each one of these?
Are you part of my group?
I think so, aren't I?
Yeah, I think so. I'll tell you the reason why I want to post it there is because I really just want to encourage more people to go there for the information in the groups. And if I keep posting it everywhere, then no one's actually going to join that group.
So you mean the Facebook
me posting
group?
it there is like the incentive. Exactly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay. So the next suggestion, the next actionable step would be to regularly consume turmeric. Turmeric, otherwise known as curcumin, is a spice. It's yellow. It stains your fingernails when you use it. It's delicious. It flavors mustard. The reason why this is fantastic is because this is one of the few foods that we consume that increase a chemical that stands for BDNF, or otherwise known as brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And what that does is helps with cell longevity, stability, and brain plasticity. It helps decrease inflammation in the brain. So it creates a kind of like a neural resilience, allows for cells to recover, and allows for pathways in the brain to change, which is really helpful when you're trying to change your perception of reality. Okay. I don't normally recommend for people to take them in capsule form unless it's absolutely necessary. I think that if people regularly consume it in their food, it's much more absorbable. So having a half a teaspoon a day, I think, is a really, really good goal. Okay.
Neely, I have a quick question about the turmeric.
Please.
I put that in my cocoa. Does it affect the efficacy of it if it's in water?
No, not at all.
No? Okay.
Is there a little bit of like oil in there? Is there like a little, well, it's with the cocoa, so that has a little bit of fat. It just needs to be with a little bit of fat in order to be absorbed, but the cocoa has fat, so you're fine.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I put cinnamon in there, collagen, make it super healthy, and I love it.
Yummy. Korakavod.
So
We
you
should
wouldn't
all learn
recommend
from you.
you wouldn't recommend taking like let's say like doTERRA like turmeric, like a drop of turmeric in water, you're saying. Don't take it with water.
Well, I'm not negative. I'm not against doTERRA, and that's in an oil format, so that's going to be really absorbed. I just think that it's something that people should regularly consume in their food. I think from the research, although I don't know if doTERRA is part of that research, from the research, what we see is that turmeric in food is way more absorbable than if you were taking it in supplement form. Okay. Okay, the next suggestion that I have is an amino acid called L-theanine. A lot of amino acids affect the metabolism in the brain, and they also affect neurotransmitter production. L-theanine is really good for anyone who specifically experiences anxiety. It's, I don't know if you've ever noticed, sometimes people could feel like that energetic buzz when they drink coffee versus when they drink green tea. Even though they feel energized, they don't feel like that shakiness. And the reason why that most likely is because green tea is very high in something called L-theanine. It's what allows for our energy to feel smooth. It takes away a lot of the anxiety that sometimes we could feel when we have high energy. It's something that's really good for the adrenal glands. It's also something that's really good for, again, building neurotransmitters, building serotonin, building GABA, etc. Okay. Omega-3 fatty acids, at least 1,000 milligrams per day, really fantastic for the cellular processing in your brain. And again, like you said, like L-theanine, essential amino acids. Now, listen. If I was someone who was experiencing anxiety and depression, I would say that this entire list would be mandatory. Okay. I'm not talking about situational anxiety, meaning I'm a happy-go-lucky person that's normally very, very calm and like normally, like I'm not really bothered, right? Which doesn't seem realistic in today's world. But if you're someone who really suffers, regardless of whether you're taking medication or not, these are things that I would take, which means these are safe to take on any medication. Okay. Now,
what are the amino acids?
Essential amino acids. There are specific amino acids like glycine and taurine in addition to the L-theanine, but glycine and taurine, I think, are the number ones that are really, really effective for managing depression.
So what do they come in? Like what?
They come in capsules. You could get it in a combination of capsules. And again, I'll post links for them in my Nourish Daily Facebook group. Again, I do not profit a single cent on these suggestions. Okay. Okay. So moving on, some more actionable steps. So this was in the category of either nutrient deficiencies or nutrients, things that we could take orally or from our food that will help us and our depression. Now, the next actionable steps. 30 minutes of cardio every day. I want you guys to understand that I normally never recommend 30 minutes of cardio every day to anyone. This is specific to people who are experiencing anxiety and depression. Typically, when people ask me what's my opinion on how much exercise I should commit to, I say 20 minutes of movement a day, and that could be stretching. That could be head, shoulders, knees, and toes as far as I'm concerned. But that is not going to be something that's going to be helpful for someone who's experiencing anxiety and depression. When someone's experiencing, or when someone needs help with their mental health, that person needs cardio. And the reason why that person needs cardio is because they need extra blood flow to the brain. We have this false notion that blood is flowing throughout our body to every single part of our body equally at all times. And that is absolutely not true. Our heart only pumps about 30% of our blood. The rest of our blood movement is supposed to be coming from our muscular contractions. So anytime I move my body, I am participating in blood flow. Cardio plays a very specific role in that it increases the amount of blood flow that goes to the brain. If anxiety and depression is a metabolic disorder in the brain cells, as just one of the cells that is being affected, then those cells need more oxygen for the metabolism to function properly and to have the best cellular environment, and more blood, which is what allows for those cells to get the nutrients and the oxygen and all the supplements that you're taking. Doing all of this is great, but without the exercise, it's almost meaningless. And I know people who have gotten off of prescription medication because they've been committed to doing cardio. Okay. I'm not saying that cardio is something that every single person in this world should commit to doing, although it has its benefits. I'm only giving this suggestion because it is specific to people with anxiety and depression. Okay. I'm just going to finish this page. Oh, let me finish this page and then I'm going to open for questions. The next one that I would suggest is sleeping at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Sleep is essential for recovery. When we sleep, our body recovers. If it's a cellular metabolic disorder, that means the cells need to clean house, recover. They need a processing time. If we don't have that processing time, cells will not recover. They'll be prone to having issues. Now, as we get older, we actually tend to need more sleep. It kind of goes in a wave. We need a lot of sleep. It goes a little bit less sleep. And then again, we need more sleep. I think by the time you hit 30, you need between 7 to 8 hours of sleep. There's some people who need more than that. I would not suggest having less than 7. Once people hit 6 hours of sleep regularly a night, there are a lot of different dysfunctions in the body that tend to occur. Very little people actually benefit from having 6 hours of sleep. I know that it's sometimes not in our control, but it's something that we need to aim for. Now, diet has such a huge impact on metabolic disorders. Okay. I'm going to use the example of keto so that you understand what I'm talking about, but please note that I am not suggesting keto. Okay. Please note that I'm not suggesting keto. I'm just using it as an example. So the ketogenic diet is a diet that basically dictates that a person needs to eat a very high quantity of fat and only 20 grams of carbohydrates or less, which is very, very little, and a very specific amount of protein that's dependent on your body weight. If you follow this protocol, a shift in your metabolism happens. And instead of getting your energy from sugar or glucose, you're essentially getting your energy from ketones. Okay? And this shift, for many people, can fix different metabolic disorders. So when we look at research in psychiatric research, what we see is that a lot of people with, again, genetic anxiety and depression, their symptoms almost completely alleviate between 2 to 4 weeks of following the ketogenic diet. Where do we know that the ketogenic diet is useful? We have known this for over 1,000 years, more than that. We used to use the ketogenic diet for people who have epilepsy. Epilepsy hardly has that many treatments. The number one and most effective treatment for epilepsy, which is again an inherited metabolic disorder, the number one treatment for that, more than any medication, is a ketogenic diet. And it goes back to this question of like, well, what is the cause of the dysfunction? Is it an imbalance in like a neurotransmitter, which is like a chemical messenger? Or is it something that's happening on a cellular level? Most likely a metabolic disorder. And so the question is, if it's a metabolic disorder, most likely changing your diet, which therefore changes your metabolism, is going to have the biggest impact. Now, there's a lot of people that are very for the ketogenic diet for anyone experiencing anxiety and depression, but these people are not nutritionists. Okay? What I know and see very clearly is that the ketogenic diet is not suitable for everyone. It is not a cure-all. And even though you could have the same symptom, it's not going to be the same for two people. Meaning 2 people could have the same symptom. It's going to maybe be beneficial for one, going to be totally detrimental for the other. Because what I could tell you from my professional experience as someone who's worked as a nutritionist for more than 13 years is people respond differently to different diets. I'll give you a very unique example. When it comes to diabetes, which is an example of another metabolic disorder, there are some people with diabetes that going on a ketogenic diet completely cures them of their diabetes. Whereas there is another group of people that can do the ketogenic diet with diabetes and it makes it worse. Okay? And if you took this group and put them on a low-fat vegan plan, which means that they're having absolutely no oil and no animal products, and which basically means high carb plan, that can completely cure them of their diabetes. Different approaches, almost 100% opposite. One is high fat, almost completely animal based, and the other one is free of all animal products and no fat, and they will both treat diabetes, but they'll treat people differently. And so why am I saying this, and why am I not making specific dietary recommendations, is because every person requires something differently. You could play around with it. I invite you to play around with it, but I also highly suggest that you go to someone who's trained, who could help you determine what your body type is, and then follow a plan based off of that, because you'll have, again, just a more streamlined experience. In addition to just changing your diet to help fix a metabolic disorder, which again, diet is the most useful for changing a metabolic disorder because it's literally touching on your metabolism. The second suggestion that I can make in regards to changing your diet is following a cleansing routine. Sometimes, specifically when it comes to metabolic disorders that are acquired and not inherited, going on a cleanse is one of the fastest ways to fix the metabolic discrepancies that are happening in the cells. So I offer a cleansing program that's going to be starting in a few weeks, but there are multiple different types of cleanses. It's unfortunately a separate conversation. If someone has a specific question about that, I'd be happy to answer. But that's an actionable step that a person can take when they're treating their anxiety and depression. And again, like what I said before, we need to call upon or execute 4 to 5 different actionable steps. It could be that right now where you are in your life, changing your diet is just not what you have the capacity to do. I totally understand that. There are so many other action steps that you can take. It's just something to consider if this is something that you're experiencing. The very last thing that I want to talk about, which is going to cover this slide and the next, is making sure that you fix your hormones. For example, if you have a thyroid dysfunction, you could experience anxiety and depression that is solely caused by your thyroid, and will essentially not go away unless the thyroid is treated properly, which means sometimes not just relying on L-thyroxine, which is just T4 that's taken, but also maybe sometimes taking amino acids that help the thyroid, or taking T3 to help create a successful amount of thyroid hormone. If this is something that's specific to you, I'd be happy to answer questions about it. But just so you know, if you have a thyroid condition and you're also experiencing anxiety and depression, it could be that your anxiety and depression is simply not being relieved because the thyroid issue is not being relieved. And then the other hormones are gender hormones like estrogen, progesterone, or testosterone if you're a man. Let's talk about men first because it's a little bit easier. If a man is experiencing low testosterone, they are going to be more prone for depression, okay? There are a few things that you need to test for in your testosterone. You need to test free testosterone and total testosterone. Until you have those 2 markers, you don't know if you have a testosterone deficiency, okay? When it comes to estrogen and progesterone, okay, this is something that's really, really important. There's something called PMDD, which for men, unfortunately, many women experience, but it's basically when women experience severe imbalances in their mental health, either at times of ovulation or in times of their pregnancy. Not pregnancy, times of ovulation or times of their period, okay? There are debates of why they experience this. I'm in the camp of it's due to estrogen falls. I think estrogen affects a woman's risk of depression more than progesterone. But either way, there's a very, very simple solution for anyone experiencing PMDD or hormone-related anxiety and depression. So the very simple solution for that is something called seed cycling. I had a client who had very severe PMDD. She was suicidal at times of ovulation and at times of her period, and it completely went away when she just did this one thing, which is seed cycling. And seed cycling is when you consume different fats at different times of your cycle. Day 1 of your period to day 14 of your cycle, it's advised to have a 1/4 cup of raw ground flax seeds. Day 15, which is when right after ovulation, to day 28, have a 1/4 cup of raw ground sesame seeds. If you live here in Israel, you could go to the health food store in Tanitzata Duvdevan, go to the refrigerated section, they'll have a bag of raw ground flax seeds, and they'll have a bag of raw ground sesame seeds. Buy it, put it in your fridge, mark day 1 to day 14 on the flax, day 15 to day 28 on the sesame, and you're good to go. Now, you could still have estrogen-related anxiety and depression when you're in menopause. And so if you're in menopause, sometimes it's really beneficial to take hormone replacement therapy to quell depression, because that would actually be better for you than, let's say, taking an SSRI, because that would treat the cause of the problem. Or if you're in menopause, you could have both a 1/4 cup of raw ground flaxseed and a 1/4 cup of ground sesame seed and have that every day. Okay, and that will help build your estrogen and your progesterone naturally. And the very, very last thing that I'll say before I open the floor to question, I appreciate your patience, is that in addition to this, another actionable step is meeting with a professional, whether it's a functional doctor, a functional nutritionist like myself, and taking specific supplements. There's a lot of them that can help. It's like medicine. It's really like medicine that can either help the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the adrenal gland, taking specific supplements to build up your neurotransmitter, taking supplements to release trapped emotions, or anything possible to further rectify in a very accurate and personal and individualized way what could potentially be causing your metabolic disorder. Okay? So those are all the actionable steps. Now I open the floor to questions. Go for it. Who has a question?
I have a question. Do you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Lisa.
Hi. I'm just wondering, in the second actionable step, you mentioned something about sesame seeds?
Yes.
Sunflower seeds. In the phosphatidylserine, that second one?
Oh, yeah, phosphatidylcholine and phosphatidylserine.
Yeah.
Sunflower seed lecithin, for an example, is a very cheap way of getting phosphatidylcholine. Sometimes we'll go to these like supplement websites and they'll be like, here, let me sell you phosphatidylcholine. And then they'll mark it up like so expensive. And it's just like, it drives me crazy. When if you get sunflower seed lecithin, it's the same amount of choline, but it's like tremendously cheaper. It's just a different marketing. And so that's one way of getting, let's say, phosphatidylcholine. It's not going to be phosphatidylserine. That's going to have to be a separate supplement. But sunflower seed lecithin is a really great way of getting it in an inexpensive way as well.
Okay, fine. And then in terms of the omega and green tea, that's like any omega shalosh and any green tea, or something specific?
The green tea was just an example of showing you that L-theanine, which is the amino acid that you really want, has naturally occurring L-theanine. Green tea has naturally occurring L-theanine. So you could either just drink green tea all day long and get the L-theanine from that, or you could take the L-theanine in a supplement form. And what was your question about the omega-3? Sorry.
Anything any specific brands or?
So again, I'm going to post. Oh, you're not part of my Facebook group, are you?
No.
Oh, then maybe I'll just send out a private email to all those who attended, and I'll give you guys the links as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Of course.
Neely,
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah. Yes, Erin.
When you were talking about cardio, does that include walking?
That's a really great question. If you are walking really, really fast, and uphill, then that could be considered cardio. Really, what cardio means is that your heart rate is above 140. So if you have some like watch that measures your heart rate, then that's something that you could really utilize and assess whether you're really in a cardiovascular state.
Okay. And my other question for you regarding diet is sugar. And sugar, just the propensity to not wean yourself off of sugar. Do you have any recommendations for that in terms of supplements, or
like how to wean yourself off of sugar, or is that an important thing to do?
Well, I know it's an important thing to do.
Okay.
I don't have any question.
I've heard
there.
every kind of question, so I'm just making sure.
I just wanted to know if you had any suggestions with supplements in terms of kind of reducing your cravings for sugar, because I have an issue with sugar where I literally
So I
will go
think that
through
you're asking a
withdrawal.
really big question. I think the benefit of someone who's a functional nutritionist is able to know all the reasons why someone has an increased sugar craving. And unfortunately, there are so many different reasons that it all makes it like hard to suggest. Just one second. Esther, the Facebook group is Nourished Daily. You could go to Facebook and join Nourished Daily, and that's how you join our group. So there are many different reasons. I'll list the most common reasons. Okay. The first reason for cravings for sugar is that you're simply undernourished. Many times people have vitamin and mineral deficiencies, and those deficiencies increase our appetite, increase our desire for eating more sweet foods, because really we have a deficiency. So if someone were to just take a really good quality whole food based multivitamin and make sure that they're eating enough vegetables to fulfill all their nutrient requirements, most of the time their desire for sugar goes down, because really, again, the main cause of the desire was a nutrient deficiency. That's number one. Number two, another main cause of desire for sugar is candida. When someone has too much fungus in their body, it completely changes their metabolism, makes their body want sugar, because that's what will feed the monster inside. That's what feeds the parasite/fungus. So anything parasitic, fungus, bacterial dysbiosis, parasites, having that can really increase a person's likelihood for desiring sugar. And if that's the case, they actually need to be on a very a rigorous candida protocol to take away their desire for sugar. Another reason could be from a dopamine imbalance, believe it or not. Sometimes when we have a dopamine imbalance, then we crave sugar. If we increase our dopamine, it takes away our desire for sugar. I'm trying to think about the other major causes. I think those are the major three. If what I would do in like a big adult, that's a Hebrew word. What I would do is, instead of thinking about taking sugar out, right, I would think about making sure that I'm having what I'm supposed to have. I think sometimes people try too hard to take out before they add in. Always focus on adding in first. So in the first case, like I said, it's normally a nutrient deficiency. Instead of focusing on your sugar, focus on the intake of all the things that you're supposed to. And then if you still want sugar in addition to that, most likely, again, the desire will be less. In the case of candida, that doesn't really work, because you really have to kill it, which means you have to starve it out. So I think you just need to see someone to assess what the reason is for you.
Okay, so they
I'm
can
sorry,
test
that was
for
a very
candida?
long answer.
Can they test
There
for
is a test for candida. There are different tests you could test for it. With just a few questions that you could ask yourself to even know if you're in the right track of it is, do you experience brain fog? Do you have skin conditions? Do you have mucus in your stool when you poop? Do you have chronic yeast infections? Do you crave sugar? These are very common. Sometimes do you experience constipation? These are very common. Or do you feel like you're retaining water? Do you feel phlegmy? This is like the attributes of people who have candida.
Okay. Rebel Wilson had that.
Oh,
She
a lot of people.
She went to a clinic to treat it. That's how she lost all the weight.
I mean, I highly recommend for anyone who has candida to go to a clinic, because then you get a direct approach. As you know, I'm a nutritionist, so I'm very pro people getting help from other people.
Neely?
Yes.
Yora, I just want to say thank you very, very much. It's very helpful. My question is, all these recommendations that you've said, like for example, I'm on supplements, how long does one have to take them for? Like, are you ever able to write the problem, or do you have to be on all these supplements for the rest of time, or does the body?
It's a really great question. It's
like,
a really great question.
How long do you do this for?
So first off, I would say that it takes about 1 to 2 months to see changes in your mental health once you take these actionable steps. It takes 1 to 2 months, so you should not feel disappointed if you're not seeing changes right away, because it takes time to build neurotransmitters, to shift issues in the cells, etc. So if you're going to implement these actionable steps, the supplements, whatever, you have to take them for at least 1 month to 2 months and then know, okay, this is working for me, fantastic. In regards to then deciding if you need them or not, I think it's more of a question of, can you first assess whether what you were experiencing was something that was acquired versus something that was inherited? If you know that your situation was acquired based off of just like so many life choices that didn't serve you, then most likely this is not a forever thing, and you could slowly go off the supplements and see how you feel. And if you have a rebound effect, meaning, okay, now you feel like your depression came back, okay, I have to go back on these things. If someone has an inherited condition, most likely a lot of these actionable steps are going to be things that they're dependent on. Okay. But in my opinion, we have to change the narrative with how we perceive that. No, there's no problem with being dependent on taking magnesium. Okay. It's, we're dependent on oxygen. We're dependent on food. We don't exist off of just nothing. We always utilize and exist off of something. And I think when people know what works for them and they get positive results from that, I think that there's something really positive from that. So just like with thyroid medication, sometimes when someone has to take thyroid medication, that's a lifelong medication that a person has to take. Isn't it wonderful if someone has to take something lifelong, that it's simply just magnesium and it's a supplement and it's cheap and it's readily available, etc. So I think that you have to play with it. You have to take something for 2 months, gradually go down, see if the depression comes back or not. If it does come back, go back on it, and play around with it.
Nearly 2 questions.
Yes.
One's about cleansing. There are many cleanses going around.
Yes.
I'm wondering if, and I noticed, like, there's a question of who does it, and is cleansing also individual, is I think what I'm asking, because there's something going on.
Is cleansing individual? Like,
Yeah,
are different cleanses appropriate for other people?
Yeah, I find that cleanses that are only liquid based, like, I feel they make me very anxious. I don't feel like I'm eating, even if they've got packed stuff in them, everything. But when I drink, I don't feel like I'm eating. So I'm just hungry and dying for it to end. So I'm wondering if there's an advantage to that. I don't think so. I'm looking for a
I think that you're asking a really fantastic question. So cleansing, when I do my cleanse, I typically explain to people what's the difference between a regular diet and like a cleanse. When it comes to like a real cleanse, it should have a few different variables. There needs to be digestion is considered, like working on the digestive tract, because that's 80% of health, and it accounts for energy restoration and how you're able to utilize your energy. So that you have a surplus of energy for healing. There needs to be some part of the detox that enhances your body's natural ability to eliminate, whether that's improving the kidneys, the liver, the lungs, the digestive system, the lymphatic system. And then the last thing is that there needs to be ingredients for repair. Okay. As long as, which basically means that you're consuming something that builds your body back up. So whoever you decide to do a cleanse with, I think it's very fair to ask, how is this detox addressing those three things? Now, you could find a detox that's completely liquid that addresses those three things, and it still might not be suitable for you because of your history with food. I wouldn't suggest a detox to a lot of different people, specifically if someone had like a history with an eating disorder. That might not be an appropriate thing. That might be too triggering for someone. Also, there are differences between like cooling detoxes and hot detoxes. That might be something that a person needs to consider. If the body is too cold, then a person's going to need a hot detox. If the body is too hot, then a person's going to need a cold detox. Long story short, I know this is not going to answer you so well, but consulting with a person who's an expert is great. And also, before any detox, something that I strive to do, but I'm not always successful, is you should really sit down with the person who's offering the detox, and there should be some type of way for them to assess whether this would be right for you or not. So consult to the person who's offering the program and say, I really want to speak to you. I want to know that this is right for you. Let me tell you a little bit about what I'm dealing with. And hopefully this person is honest enough that they could tell you, you know what, this isn't the right thing for you, or this actually would be.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
I might have to schedule with you. Another question just about menopause, because
yes,
I'm in that stage and I'm not candidate for HRT because I have issues with population. So and my sleep's affected just because that's one of this. There's a lot of sleep disruption and heat waves as well. So
there's a really fantastic supplement that I would recommend as a really good thing to try out first. I forgot the name of the company that makes it, but you could go on iHerb and find it. It's called Transitions. And that's something for any woman who's experiencing menopause to take. It really helps with a lot of the symptoms that you talked about. You might need more than that, but that's something that I feel very comfortable recommending to any woman. And see how that feels for you. And if that's not enough for you, then it's time to go into someone and get more personalized attention.
Okay, and one last thing with children, what you said about neurotransmitters, those there are it's the same with children. If my daughter is
everything's the same with children.
It's the same. So they might also
everything's the same.
So you could also assess a child. Someone could come with you with a 10-year-old and you would be able...
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't think you would be able to assess a child in an interview because children are very much inhibited in front of strangers. I don't know if that's something that you could easily tell from a conversation, unless you're someone who's really trained to do that. I am not trained to do that. So probably for them, like a saliva test would be the best. I wouldn't do that with someone who's going through puberty, however, because their change in hormones is not going to lead to like like their neural environment is so dynamic. I don't know if I would trust the results if they were going through puberty.
But a 10-year-old?
A 10-year-old probably, yeah. Yeah, specifically if you're thinking that your 10-year-old needs to be on psychiatric medication, which a lot of the times, children do. And from what I've heard from psychiatrists that deal with children, I've heard that early intervention is really key. When you actually intervene and give children the medication that would benefit them, it actually creates positive, long-lasting effects. So like the medication is short term, but the positive effect is actually long term. And so I'm not one who shies away from psychiatric medication. If a person really feels like that's not what they need, I understand that. And I don't really question that. But, again, sometimes people just don't have a choice. And it's always better. Like you can always experiment with it, see what works for you. It's better to do it than to suffer. Let's just put it that way.
Neely, I have a question
Yeah, please.
because I'm a number 3. So
Uh-huh.
it says it's a glutamate to GABA conversion problem. So how
Right.
do you convert it better?
So the supplements that I suggested to you are fantastic.
So those will
The
convert it better. That qualifies
It
for
will
them too.
100% convert it better. And something that you could also do on the short term is take GABA. You could actually take GABA in a supplement form. That's something that I didn't put on my slides because that might not be suitable for every person. And I felt like that would be a dangerous suggestion. But because you're asking, I could say that that's sometimes something people would do. Like, for example, when my twins were born and they were in the hospital, and it was just like a really, really stressful situation. One of the things that I took every day was magnesium, L-theanine, B vitamins, and GABA. And I tell you, it really saved me. That's an example of like short-term anxiety. Taking those supplements, even though it's also really great for people on the long term, it's also really helpful on the short term. And because I was taking that whole cocktail of things, I was able to create more of the neurotransmitter GABA, which helps you feel relaxed. So it really helped me have a sense of calm despite the chaos.
Thank you so much.
Of course, of course.
I can ask 2 things. One was just what
Yeah.
you said about the blood flow to the brain, cardio. What
Yeah.
about like elevating your legs at night? Does that not help? Or
Elevating your legs at night does help, I guess, in a way, help with blood flow in a sense, but I don't know how that is helping you get it to your brain. I don't think that that's doing
no?
anything.
Okay. And vitamin D, like you didn't really mention it, did you? But is it part of the
Right,
supplement?
because vitamin D is really, really healthy. It's really fantastic. And if you have a deficiency, any kind of deficiency, even an iron deficiency, which we did not talk about, is going to have a negative impact on the cells, right? Any deficiency is.
Okay.
So I think that if someone does a blood test and notices that they have a vitamin D deficiency, I would definitely add that as an actionable step. But I was being very specific because people could be completely nourished, so to speak, be getting everything that they're supposed to, and then still be experiencing anxiety and depression. And so that's why I didn't incorporate vitamin D, but it's a good question. It should be said that any deficiency should be treated in addition to.
Okay, fine. And also for if someone's breastfeeding or postpartum, can all these extra and anxious, so does that all these things will still apply equally, or they have to be special?
That's a fantastic question. Let me go back. B vitamins, 100%. The phosphatidylserine and choline are advised when you're pregnant. Magnesium is interesting. I would take a smaller dose of the magnesium just because sometimes magnesium could help relax smooth muscles, and people are nervous that that might cause miscarriage, which it would 100% not cause miscarriage, but it's just a concern. So it's still an essential nutrient. You still have to have magnesium. I
I'm
just
talking
wouldn't
about
take high
postpartum.
doses of it. Oh, postpartum? None of them are an
Breastfeeding.
issue.
All of them are fine. And then
None of them are
do
an
you have
issue.
of
I
the
was talking about
flax
pregnancy, sorry.
or I like food things. So of the flax seeds or sesame seeds, if you're not having it, if you're not ovulating because you're breastfeeding, so then which one of those 2 is the one for the breastfeeding?
If you're not ovulating, then I wouldn't worry about that as an actionable step because that's really there to resolve depleted estrogen. There's nothing you could do about it. When you're nursing, you're going to have depleted estrogen, and increasing your estrogen sometimes could change your breast milk. So I would just put that off until something to think about after you're done nursing.
But what about the low moods that come with that?
What?
What about like the postpartum low moods? Does it not?
Right.
But all
All right, I
these,
understand.
yeah, okay, but all the some of
I
these
do
things
all
will
the
be-
other actionable steps.
Yeah, okay. I think the cardio is also that's a good one. And also, and if you're craving sunlight, like you're craving, what about like being with people? I think you might have mentioned this last one, oxytocin, like being with people. Is that also relevant?
I'm so sorry. I just didn't hear the first
I
part of
think
the
2
question.
weeks ago you mentioned like when you, or maybe it was, no, maybe it wasn't you. I had too many webinars. When you're stressed, they were saying like actually by being around people,
Right.
that actually
We
like
did
is a really good
say that.
way
We
to
said that when you're around people, people give you a sense of safety. When you're around people and you feel you could be vulnerable around them, right? It's very different if you're in a crowd and you don't feel like you could be vulnerable. But if you're around people and you feel like you could be vulnerable, that stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system. But that I didn't say that in regards to oxytocin.
Okay, yeah, no, sorry. That's someone else. Okay. Thanks so much. Amazing.
Of course. Denise, your granddaughter is adorable. It's granddaughter, right? Yeah, okay. So cute. Ugh.
Neely,
Yeah.
is there such a thing
Yeah.
as too much sleep?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that too much sleep can be sometimes a sign of depression. Okay. And so if it's a sign of depression, then it's really just a symptom. It's not causing damage, but it's more just a symptom of a problem. So I don't know how to answer that. I know that people really differ in how much they need. I know adults that need 9 hours of sleep. I wouldn't question that if someone said that. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think it's hard to know
Yeah.
if it's more from a symptom of depression or it's just what your needs are.
Right. But it's not like you're saying like you need like 7 to 8 hours, but it's not like if you get 10 or 11 hours, then it's bad. It's like not
No, I don't think
inherently.
it causes harm. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think it causes harm.
Right. Also another question, this is probably I think you might have done a different workshop on this, so I can go find it. But I think I'm wondering just like with the fixing your hormones, how it affects like with PCOS.
So we haven't had a lecture on it. I think that hormones will be the next lecture. So I'm going to leave you hanging for the next time.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
And just ask quickly about
Any
the
other?
sleep. Can you
Yes.
make up for it during the day if you don't get it at night?
I'm sorry, what can you make up for?
You
The
get
sleep?
the sleep,
No.
yeah. No.
No, unfortunately not. Research shows that you cannot make up the sleep that you missed at night. Napping is fantastic. You do get benefits from it, but it's a little bit more complicated. Depending on which researcher you listen to, most sleep experts say that you can't make it up. So
And
it's
is it
definitely
also
better to
before
nap if you're.
midnight? Is it also that thing of before midnight is more golden hours or something? Do you believe in that?
Right. No, yeah, I do see that. I could tell you that without even looking at research. It's just with my clients, it's night and day. The people who go to sleep after midnight versus people who go to sleep before midnight, there's a very big difference.
Okay. Yeah.
Which now makes me have to apologize for keeping you up late. Okay. All right, guys. It was such a pleasure to sit down with you and talk
Thank
about
you
a really
so much.
my pleasure. If you guys have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to be sending out the recording of this with the slides and links. So it might not be able to send it out tomorrow, but maybe the following day because it sometimes takes a while to load. And then you're more than welcome to share this material with anyone. It's free. Send forth to whoever you want. Okay, guys? Okay, amazing. Wonderful.
Thank
We should
you.
hear good news. Should hear good
Amen.
news. It should be good. We should be mentally healthy. We should be able to manage ourselves. Okay. Bye, you guys.
Amen. You too. Thank you. And to everyone.